It's not the crime that unsettles most people at first. It's the moment before anyone knew there was a crime at all. A quiet street in the early hours of the morning. Everything still, everything exactly where it should be, and yet somehow everything already wrong. Inside that house, something had already happened, something no one could see yet. No sound spilled into the street. No scream broke through the walls. No sudden movement drew attention. Just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but feels like it's holding something in. By the time the sun came up, that silence was still there, sitting in the rooms, settling into the corners, wrapping itself around everything that looked normal on the outside. And by the time anyone realized something was wrong, it was already too late. The story had already begun, and the only thing left was to understand how it ended like this. Frederick, Colorado, August 13th, 2018, began like any other day. The neighborhood was calm in the way people trust without thinking. Houses lined neatly along the street. Families living close enough to know each other's routines. The kind of place where nothing ever really happens. That's what makes it harder to understand. Because nothing about the outside of that home suggested that anything inside it had already gone terribly wrong. At around 2 a.m., Shanann watched return home. She had just come back from a trip, the kind of tire that settles deep into your body after travel, where all you want is your own bed, your own space, a moment to breathe again. A neighbor's security camera captured her walking up to the front door. There was nothing unusual about the way she moved. No hesitation, no fear, no sense that this would be the last ordinary moment she would ever have. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and disappeared from view. That moment would later become important, not because of what it showed, but because of what came after it. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. Inside the house, her daughters were asleep. Bella, 4 years old, and Cece, just 3. Too young to understand how quickly safety can disappear. Too young to know that the place meant to protect them could become something else entirely. And somewhere inside that same house was Chris Watts, a man who, to most people, seemed ordinary in a way that made him easy to overlook. Quiet, reserved, not the kind of person who draws attention or raises questions. The kind of person you pass by without remembering. And maybe that's why no one saw it coming. Because nothing about him demanded suspicion. Morning came, and at first, nothing seemed wrong. Not in a way that could be seen. But then something small happened. Something easy to dismiss if it had been anyone else. Shanann missed an appointment. On its own, it meant nothing. People miss things all the time. But this wasn't just anyone. This was someone who showed up, someone who responded, someone who didn't simply disappear from her own life without explanation. Calls were made. Messages were sent. Each one met with the same thing, nothing. And slowly, that feeling began to settle in. That quiet, uncomfortable feeling that something isn't right, even when you don't have a reason yet. The kind of feeling you try to ignore at first, hoping there's a simple explanation waiting on the other side of it. But the more time passed, the harder it became to ignore. Her friend Nicole was one of the first to feel it fully. Concern turned into urgency in a way that didn't need proof. She drove to the house, knocked on the door, waited longer than she normally would have, listening for any movement inside. There was nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no sign that anyone was there. Then she noticed the car. Shanann's car was still in the garage. That detail settled heavily, because it didn't make sense. If she had left, she wouldn't have left without it. If she was inside, why wasn't she answering? Nicole called again. Still nothing. At that point, the situation had crossed into something else entirely. Not confusion anymore, but fear. So she called the police. When officers arrived, they approached the situation the way they always do. Carefully, methodically, looking for anything that stood out. But the house didn't look like a crime scene. It looked normal. Too normal. Inside, everything was in place. Her purse was there. Her phone was there. Personal belongings left behind in a way that didn't suggest someone had planned to go anywhere. It looked less like someone had left, and more like someone had been interrupted. Chris was contacted and asked to come home. When he arrived, there was something about his presence that didn't match the situation. Not in a way you could immediately point to, but in a way you could feel. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't searching room to room, calling out their names, demanding answers. Instead, he moved slowly, answering questions, watching the situation unfold as if he were slightly removed from it. That difference was subtle, but it mattered. A neighbor mentioned having security footage from earlier that morning, and that's when the investigation began to shift from uncertainty into something more focused. They stood together watching the footage play. Chris stood behind the officer, arms folded, eyes fixed on the screen. On the video, his truck was backed into the driveway. That alone was unusual. He normally parked on the street. Backing into the driveway created a different angle, a different kind of access. Closer, more concealed. In the footage, he moved back and forth between the house and the truck. The movements were deliberate, repeated, purposeful in a way that raised quiet questions. At one point, he bent down near the truck, briefly disappearing from the camera's frame before standing up again. The officer paused the video, and in that moment, Chris began to speak. He explained what he was doing, filling in details quickly, offering information before it was asked for. It sounded like cooperation, but it felt like something else, like an attempt to stay ahead of something that hadn't been said yet. That moment didn't prove anything, but it planted something. And once that seed is there, it doesn't go away. Later that day, Chris stood outside his home and spoke to the media. It was a moment meant to show concern, to ask for help, to bring attention to a missing family. But something about it felt off. He spoke about wanting them back, about hoping they were safe, about not knowing where they could be, but his body didn't reflect the words. His arms were crossed, his posture closed, his movements controlled in a way that didn't match panic or fear. There were no tears, no visible desperation, just a strange calmness, and at times, a faint smile that didn't belong in that moment. People watching felt immediately, not as a conclusion, but as a question. Why does he seem like this? Investigators, meanwhile, continued building the timeline. They looked at phone records, messages, patterns of behavior leading up to that day, and what they found began to reshape everything. Chris had been having an affair. It wasn't just a detail. It was a shift in understanding. A second life running parallel to the one everyone else believed in. A relationship built on a different version of reality. One where his marriage was already over. With a future looked different than the one he had at home. But Shannon didn't know that. What she did know was that something had changed. In the days before she disappeared, she had reached out to friends, expressing concern. She felt distance, coldness, a difference in the way he spoke, the way he acted, the way he looked at her. She didn't have proof, but she felt it. And sometimes that feeling is the closest thing to truth before everything becomes clear. When Chris was brought in for questioning, he maintained the same calm demeanor. He answered questions, provided timelines, repeated his version of events. But consistency doesn't always mean truth. Sometimes it just means practice. Eventually, he agreed to take a polygraph test. It was a moment that often separates uncertainty from clarity, because while words can be controlled, the body reacts in ways that are harder to manage. He sat there, composed, answering each question, and when the results came back, they were clear. He had failed. That moment changed everything, because now, the quiet suspicion had something to stand on. When confronted, his story shifted. He claimed something had happened inside the house, something involving Sean and the children, something that forced him to react. It was an attempt to redirect, to create a version of events that explained the outcome without fully revealing the truth. But it didn't hold, and eventually, the weight of everything began to break through. What followed was a confession that revealed not just what happened, but how carefully it had been hidden beneath normal behavior. He admitted to killing his wife, inside their home, in the space where their lives had unfolded together, where their children slept, where everything had once felt safe. But even that wasn't the end of it, because what came after was harder to understand. Afterward, he loaded his truck, not just with what had happened, but with what was still alive inside that house. He drove away from the place where everything had been known and familiar, heading toward a location he believed would keep the truth hidden. And during that drive, there was silence, the kind of silence that carries something heavy inside it. At some point, a small voice broke through it, a question, simple and innocent, asking about something that no longer had an answer. And in that moment, there was a choice. And the choice that was made is the part that stays with people long after everything else is understood. When the truth finally came out, it wasn't just the actions that shocked people. It was the contrast, the difference between what was seen and what was real. A man who appeared calm while his family was missing. A man who stood in front of cameras, speaking in steady tones, asking for their return, while already knowing they never would. That contrast is what makes this story linger, because it forces a question that doesn't have an easy answer. How well do we really know the people around us? And how much can someone hide while still appearing completely normal? Chris was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. No trial, no extended denial, just the outcome waiting at the end of everything that had already been set in motion. But even now, years later, people go back to those early moments. The footage, the interviews, the way he stood, the way he spoke, the way he almost convinced people. Not because they don't understand what happened, but because they're still trying to understand how it could look so normal, right up until it didn't. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. Not just that something terrible happened, but that for a brief moment, it almost looked like nothing had happened at all. The house is empty now, and the street has returned to its quiet rhythm. But the echoes of that morning never truly fade. The photographs of Sean Ann and her daughters remain frozen in time, reminders of lives taken too soon, of laughter that will never fill those rooms again. It's easy to look back and think we could have seen the signs, could have noticed the small cracks beneath the surface. But the truth is, the ordinary can hide the unimaginable, and people can carry darkness in the most familiar faces. In the end, the story isn't just about what he did. It's about the fragile line between trust and suspicion, love and fear, safety and the unknown. And that line can shift in the blink of an eye. If you have any thoughts about this case, or theories about what really happened, leave them down in the comments. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, haunting, suspenseful, and true, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story.